Hey, good evening, everybody, and welcome to another Sunday night live. Hello, Lynn. Um, well, tonight we have two guests on tonight, and first I'll bring on the moderator. Hello, moderator.
Hello.
And we have two guests tonight. We have Ronnie Dugdale, who
Hello.
we've seen before. He's a paranormal investigator. Is that right, Ronnie? Or
No, paranormal enthusiast, I'd say. I don't
enthusiast
in investigating nowadays. I've done quite a bit for the Rendlesham Forest, but
okay. Well, yeah, paranormal, yeah, kind of an investigator. And welcome from the United States of America, Mr. John Burroughs. Hello, John. Good evening.
Hi, everybody.
Welcome.
Hi, John.
Thanks.
And John
Hey,
is,
Ronnie.
if I'm correct, John was one of the first airmen to witness the events in Rendlesham Forest. Is that correct?
Second, really.
Second.
My supervisor saw it first and got my attention. So,
well, we'll say you're the first.
okay.
And hello, Lisa, Sue, Mark, Elaine. Good evening to everybody. Well, where do we start tonight? Elaine's going to put her spirit box on again. See if we get anything coming up. And I think we may take a break in the middle. Hello, Joe. So, who do we start with? Ronnie?
John's a man.
John's a man.
Yeah.
We'll start with you, John.
Well, actually, I would say Ronnie, just because Ronnie could go over a timeline of the events before we go into the other stuff. So,
yeah, if that's what you want to do, I would.
Because that's what's in the book. The book opens with
okay. Yeah, okay. So on the first night, which was Christmas night, going into Boxing Morning, early hours in the morning, John was travelling down the East Gate with his with Bud Steffens, who was his supervisor. Bud was fairly new to RAF Bentmoors and Woodbridge. John had been there, I don't know, nearly a couple of years, a year and a half, something like that. And one of the jobs they do is they were tasked to check the East Gate because it had a combination lock on, and sometimes people knew the combination and leave it unlocked. So that's one of the jobs they do, is go around and check that. So as they're travelling down towards it, Bud Steffens says, "Did you see that, John?" And John's, "See what?" And there were some lights over the forest, looking out down the East Gate of the forest. And he says, "Have you ever seen anything like that before?" And John goes, "No, I've checked this gate hundreds of times and I've never seen anything like that." So they went down the East Gate Road, parked near the road, and they could see that the lights weren't that far into the forest. They were fairly close. The minute they got out of the vehicle, they felt like an electrostatic feeling. Things didn't feel too good. They saw this big white light. You're going to have to correct me if I'm wrong, John. And that seemed to be moving towards them. So they jumped back in the vehicle, shot down the Eastgate Road to call it in, because that was like a sensitive thing, and people used to listen to the radios. They used the landline at the Eastgate. There was a little hut there. And John rings up, I think it was Crash McCabe, John?
Yep.
You spoke to first. He was on the law enforcement desk. Well, John was well known for practical jokes. And so there's John telling Crash McCabe that there's these mysterious lights in the forest and that that was doing things that they weren't sure. That was, weren't a crashed aircraft or anything like that, but there was something weird. And he's thinking that's John on a Christmas wind-up again. So he's not taking him seriously. So then hands the phone over to Bud Steffens, his supervisor, who says, "Well, if you don't believe us, come down. The lights are still there. You can see them." So then Crash McCabe realised that was something serious. So then he had to get in contact with the Central Security Control. You have to help me out here, John. Who was the person on there? Was that Dave Coffey?
I believe so, but Donnie Dillard was the other guy that was involved.
Yeah, but I think he spoke to David Coffey, and he said there's something serious down here and you better send someone down. So he then contacted Jim Penniston, who I think was the flight chief for that night. And Jim wanted to know what was the nature of why did they need him to go down there? And they said, well, you better wait until you get down there and explain it to you. So his driver that night was Ed Cabansack, and he was another new person. He hadn't been there for long. And so they go down to the East Gate, and Jim Penniston talks with Bud Steffens, and they can see the lights there still. I think Jim must have then got permission for them to go off base. And I think part of the reason they got permission to go off base because they checked with radar and they said, yes, something had been seen. I think they checked with local radar and also with Heathrow Tower. And they said, yes, a bogey had been seen go off the screen over the Rendlesham Forest somewhere. So then he's thinking that's a downed aircraft. And so he's got to get a team to go out there and investigate. They got permission to go. He wanted Bud Steffens to go out there, and Bud Steffens is saying, I'm not going out there. I've heard about this forest and what goes on in there and these lights. And so the team was John, Ed Cabansack and Jim Penniston. So that's the task to do the whole timeline, but I'll do my best. So then they, to try and cut a long story short, they go off into the forest and they're travelling towards these lights. So they go down the Eastgate Road, turn right onto the main road. Then they find a logging track on the left-hand side, and they're heading towards these lights. So eventually they come across a berm, and as they get to the berm, they look over, and there's this really bright, intensive light. Now, this is where the stories all are different, because what John remembers and what Jim Penniston says happened, and what Ed Cabansack, they're all different. Ed can remember up to that point that they went into the forest and they were chasing these lights until they got to them. They seemed to be playing with them for a while, these lights. As they seemed to be getting closer, they'd move away and things like that. So he can remember that. He can't remember anything about a landed craft or anything like that. John says that when they got to the berm, he looked over, there was a big white light, a flash of white light, and they hit the ground. And Jim Penniston tells his side. He says that when he got close to it, that was an actual object. That was a triangular solid craft. Looked like that was crafted out of onyx, like glass-like feel. 9 foot triangular, 6 to 7 foot tall. And he goes on to say that he could see glyphs on the side of it. And he's trying to look for engines, for cockpits. There's nothing like that at all on it. And as he touched these objects, he told us a few years later in 2010 that he had a binary code download. So then I think Jim says that the craft lifted up and disappeared. John, can you tell the next bit where you chased it over the fields? Because do you want me to carry on?
No, you did fine. I meant like the timeline. I just let you go, kind of the timeline of the story, like over the years. But okay, so when we got close to it, there was, like Ronnie said, 3 of us remember different things. I remember getting close to it, and then it seemed like the lights dimmed. Then they got bright again. They shot up. Ed said in an interview he did with James Fox that I think it was out of the blue, they actually got him on tape, and he said that he remembers we got close to it, and then we all blacked out. Penniston's story is what Ronnie said. He got up, walked around it for 45 minutes, touched it, got a binary, download, all that. But when it shot back out into the field towards the coast, we got up, climbed the fence, went into the field. We could see something down by the house at first. We got there. It was gone. So at that point, in Ed and mine's statement, we even identified we saw a beacon. So we started heading out towards the beacon. One of the things he did talk about was from the time we departed the vehicle, we're on foot all the way clear out to the coast. They lost us on radio on and off at one point for over 45 minutes. We proceeded towards the coast, saw some blue lights in the sky one more time. Once we got to the coast, which that's one of the most vivid memories I have, is standing there looking down and looking at the lighthouse itself rotating. So at that point, it was gone. So we went ahead and returned back to base. That was night one. So,
well, I've got I've read your book, John, by the way, and John's got a book all about the incident, haven't you? So,
it's called Weaponization of a UAP. 40 years later, Ronnie does the complete timeline. Then we have some work done by James Worrow, who's a British researcher that did a lot of work on the technology that was outside. Wynne Keach is an engineer from the UK that did a report in the book about summarizing what do you think happened, to include that we brought a Russian satellite down during that event, the technology involved, and everything else. And the interesting thing in the book is that I contacted Colonel Halt with Wynne Keach's report, and he pretty much agreed with everything Wynne said happened, to include the satellite being brought down. But the only thing he did say was that an aircraft didn't come in and retrieve the satellite to give it back to the Russians. So, and then also a British researcher, David Clark, talked somewhat about Project Condign and the individual that did the report, and he went into some of the details of Condign.
I mean, when you were talking about going out to the coast, I've made these notes from your book, and it said that plasma orbs and lights were seen off the coast by fishermen as well.
That would be Ronnie's end. Ronnie did.
They were for quite a. They'd been spotted up the coast as far as down where I live in Galston. There'd been these orbs that came out of the sea as well as went into the sea and also shot along the coast. I can remember as a youth fishing on that beach, and there was no buoy there, and we saw this thing happen. And I can remember him saying to me, "Don't tell your parents that this happened, because they'll never believe you. They'll think you're gone round the twist." But and he told me he'd seen these big orbs that used to hang at the end of the groin, just like they were watching you, But they had been, and especially up the coast, near the Rendlesham area, the fishermen had reported these lights going in and out of the ocean all the while.
Because the authorities said, it was a lighthouse. You saw the lighthouse, or the John and the guy saw the lighthouse, didn't they? But then these fishermen, you've got now fishermen who were witnesses to what was going on there. Yeah,
over the weekend when the incidents happened, a lot of people don't know this, but that was reported really early back by Brenda in her book Sky Crash. The fishermen were paid to keep out of the waters for all that period. They were paid handsomely not to go to sea, and they were warned, don't, because that would be detrimental to your health. So obviously there was some sort of experiment going on that they needed to keep them out of there. HMS Norfolk was off the coast there. The people in that ship were told not to keep below decks and weren't allowed up on the decks. There was a Russian submarine seen out there quite a lot. The Tupolev airplane, Russian, seen off there as well. There was reports of, I think, a Russian frogman caught in the forest at one time, John?
Well, according to the email we got from the OSI agent who was involved, he said they did catch a Russian agent. They didn't really say if it was a frogman or not, but Halt was the one who originally brought up the frogman theory. So
was it? Yeah.
Oh, I've heard that before.
No, there's lots, because I think with the Rendlesham Forest incident, everyone concentrates on the same narrative that's been spewed out and there's a lot of information out there by local investigators that has been overlooked because that hasn't fitted in with what other people are saying at the conferences all the while, especially like the main characters, the main witnesses. Same thing over again.
Yeah. I mean, I've got lots of stuff down here, and twice I've put down here. So I've only made notes, so I don't remember who said it. But the Rendlesham wasn't terrifying. Is that correct?
That's John. He'll tell you.
I've been asked that. I was too much focused on what was going on to say I was like terrified. I think the only time that I felt nervous was when we first went off base. We didn't call it in. No one knew we left base. And when we got down to the end of the road, got out, and the weird feeling was there in the sky. You know, the sky seemed different. I mean, it just, those surroundings felt different. There was static electricity in the air. We knew that there was more to than just some strange lights. And we were both concerned. We didn't know what we were dealing with. But once we took off and went into the forest, there was no real fear. There was not a fear factor. It was more of, let's figure out what's going on. We were driven by adrenaline and try to figure out what we were dealing with.
Excuse me.
Yes, it says the atmosphere changed as the guys neared the lights. You know, it's I mean, having read your book, John, what for me reading, I can visualize where you were, because I've been wandering that forest for about 12 years. So it's quite fascinating to read that. It probably hasn't changed that much since you were there. I don't really know.
Well, the actual reality of it was that after the event happened, I don't have the date, but it was within a couple 3 years. There was there was called, I guess, by your weather people, like a hurricane hit that coast area and leveled the forest. And they actually, Ronnie could probably, are you back, Ronnie?
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah. It actually leveled, these winds leveled the forest, and they took all the trees out. And there was actually rumors that there was pre-staged trucks there before the event happened, and they got all the timber out, all the trees out. And then it took almost 30 years till we came back, where the forest was getting close to where it was when we first went out there, even though the actual entrance to the base was different, because the trees had grown up to the road, which wouldn't have happened. We had a clear zone and a bunch of other stuff, but the forest was pretty close to what it was like height-wise 30 years later, but it took that long to grow back. So
yeah, it was 1987. Mike just put that as well. Yeah, 1987. There was a big storm, wasn't there?
Yeah, that was the big storm, Alex. But there was an awful lot of trees removed straight after the incidents.
Was it?
Yeah, they disappeared right quick.
Yeah, it's so I'm sitting here reading what I've written, trying to read what I've written. I should have typed it out, shouldn't I? Anyway, saying that the atmosphere changed, and there was also a bright sphere of light in front of Jim Penniston. So I'll take it was all about the same time that all this happened, you know. Anyway, I'll let you carry on, guys.
Well, I mean, where do you want us to go with this? I mean,
do you want to go? Do you want a brief rundown of what happened on the second night?
Yeah, whatever. So I'm just working off. I'm just working off the notes here. So.
Okay, so on the second night, they stationed this young girl, 18-year-old Laurie Bowen, down on the East Gate. You can imagine what it'd be like there for a young person overseas, pitch black on the East Gate. And while she's there on her own, she sees a massive orangey red yellow sphere of a ball of light go over the runway and descended down on the north side of the runway, down into the forest. Well, if anything goes over the runway, they have to call it in. So she was pretty terrified. So first she called it in and said that she was scared. And John Tremontosi, one of the airmen, came down to sit with her. And, you know, to make sure she was comforted, because she was scared. She said it was just like watching something as big as the moon, looked like hands full of fire just going over the runway. So the flight chief, was she a flight chief? Lieutenant Bonnie Chamberlain, John, what was
Chamberlain was the shift commander.
Shift commander, yeah. So she was dispatched to go and investigate it. She's took with her Master Sergeant Bobby Ball. On the way towards where the East Gate is, coming from Bentwars, a sphere of light entered her truck. She went off the road, crashed the vehicle. And Laurie Bowen is hearing over the radio their shift commander, terrified, saying, I can't see, where are you, Bob, calling him by his name. And so they were a bit freaked out to think that the shift commander had lost control. And she's shouting out, she can't see, where are you, Bob? So there are some stories that say that she discharged her weapon into the whatever it was, what was in the forest, the light, whatever it was. Anyway, the person who was on supply was sent out to go pick him up. And when she got to the side of the road, there was Bob Ball and Bonnie Champlin there. And they were, said they were shaken with fear. And Bonnie Champlin was distraught, pointing into the forest, saying, they're in there, they're in there. Then the next day, Bonnie Champlin was gone. They evacuated her out and she's gone. So that was what happened on the second night.
So I suppose people, said when you talk to people, they say, well, why would aliens, if you like, a species, why would they be interested in Rendlesham? But that was probably the airbase, wasn't it?
Well, I used to think that was the experiments that we were doing in that area. Were these balls of light, were they affecting your mind in some way, and you think you're seeing something you're not? John, you'd know more about that.
Well, okay, here's the thing. At the time of the event, the flights didn't know what was going on outside the back gate. I have no idea how much the chain of command on the base knew. I don't think they did, because I don't think night 3 would have happened if they really knew what was going on at Martlesham Heath, Bawdsey, the Bawdsey, Martlesham Heath area. Never mind the fact that Andrew Pike was down there working, and now he always gets upset because he's safety of the government. But in his own words, he said he was down there talking to people on an official level. Well, there's only one official level in the United Kingdom, and that's the British government. So he was down there. They were actually looking at a phenomenon that was known in the area, down in that area. So the area was, as people have said, you yourself, Alex, off camera, said that you've been down there. People had stuff happened way before our event, through our event, and even after, and still to this day there's strange stuff that goes on. So it's definitely an area that has weird activity taking place. The government was aware of it. They were working on different types of technology, out there, and having to do with radars, plasmas. If you know about the area, that's where they originally worked on they were actually working on the death ray, which is lasers. Then they discovered radar. And from there, that was the first operational radar site in the United Kingdom, was right there, on the coast there in Orford, Ness. Okay.
Orford, Ness, yeah.
Yeah. And one of the interesting things was that, and I'm going to kind of go over some notes I have, okay, is this, that originally, and it was laughable at the time, but through research, it actually was probably involved. And I'll tell you why. The lighthouse was a researcher from the area claimed that we were just fooled by the lighthouse, but for 3 nights we chased the lighthouse beacon. But in reality, the lighthouse was connected to the original radar site, okay, which was there. They had a LORAN system that was connected, was with the black beacon at Orford Nest, and they were running low frequency waves through the lighthouse, both above ground and underground. And Pike himself confirmed that they were actually provoking the phenomenon. And so this particular transmitter would create all kinds of effects, including the plasmas themselves and everything else. And then you have Wynne Keats that says that these plasmas could actually be controlled by radar beams, where they could be going up and down. Plus, you also have the fact that that the lasers themselves would be used. So at the time when we saw these blue lights, he talked about them on his tape, and I saw them on night 3. You were like, what could that be? There's no way we have that technology. But in reality, we did. It was just plasmas that they were creating. Either they were creating themselves through this technology, or the phenomenon was being provoked. And it would actually create its own plasmas. It would create, the plasmas would come out of this phenomenon, which is what they call UAPs. And then these lasers could actually be used to control and steer, besides the radars, these plasmas that were in the sky. So it covers some of what Halt said when he saw blue lights in the sky moving around. Bobby Ball said in his CNN interview, it looked like it was doing a grid pattern, and they could actually control the blue lights with lasers and radars to make those effects. So part of what was going on was that. Never mind, we've got quite a bit of documents to support it. I won't go too deep into it today, but they could create a time dilation bubble, which is probably exactly what happened on the first night and the third night. I can't speak for the second night, but especially when Adrian and I got close to this, most likely I went into a time dilation bubble and I actually disappeared, which would counter with the effects of a time dilation. When you go in it, everything changes. So it would also explain the effect of the static electricity in the air. The tower on night 3 saw this like whitish, brownish, hueish bubble come down out of the sky over the forest area where we were. So we probably were not only involved with the plasmas being moved around and whether they came from the phenomena were created by our technology, but also by time dilation bubbles that were being created, which time dilation bubbles actually lead to wormholes. And it's good. There's a possibility based off of the research the government's done that these areas like Rendlesham could have a weakness in EM fields, and you could actually provoke a mini, type of wormhole that actually, and when you really look at it, Halt when he said he looked at the star scope and saw the effects he saw, including molten lead coming down, that's the effect of a mini wormhole opening. So this is all, and for people that will want to argue these are documents that support this. And in the book we cite the actual documents, declassified documents. Never mind the fact that Condign itself, which is a declassified secret report that the British government put together, showed that what the people that were involved, including myself, were exposed to UAP radiation. So the British government was well aware of what they were doing in that area, and the United States government was working with them. So a lot of the technology was probably in its infant stages where it was still in R&D. So they were still working on it. It wasn't operational yet, but they were working on that, including studying the phenomenon that's in the area.
Yeah, I went to Orford, went over to Orford Ness earlier this year. And as we were walking around, they do this guided tour thing. And the guy said, "Oh, by the way, there aren't any tunnels between here and Rendlesham." That made me think, are there tunnels between there and Rendlesham?
There actually are, because a friend of ours, Gordy is his name, when I visited in 2018, we went out to Bawdsey and they got on the grounds, and he went into the radar facility, and there were tunnels leading out from the radar facility heading out into the forest. They had water in it, so he couldn't go. That was one of the things that Halt said, that there was no tunnels because of the water table. But in reality, Gordy, there's pictures he posted online showing the tunnels that led out into the forest.
But that was not true anyway, John, because if you look at the Ordnance Survey map, both Bentwaters and Woodbridge are way above sea level.
Well, yeah, but I mean, if you just
we put tunnels under the sea, so
yeah, right, yeah, but I'm just saying there were tunnels leading from Bawdsey into the forest.
Yeah, I've seen the pictures from Gordy.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, so there are tunnels that go out into the forest. Now, do they go all the way to the base? Well, here's another thing that they weren't being honest about. That Woodbridge base was used as a recovery base in World War II for fighters returning from over in Germany. And they had these tunnels that they built that they put fuel on, and they would light the fuel. And what were the houses called, Ronnie, that they had out there? That one was gone, but they had these pumping houses that would pump the fuel, and they would light the fuel, and that would cut through the fog so these planes could crash or land
Mm.
from coming back from the war, what they were doing in Germany. So there were underground tunnels in the forest with that. So
yeah, I was just so surprised. It was so quick. Oh, there are no tunnels. I thought, well, that means there are.
well,
So,
I mean, there's evidence there is. Let's just put it to that
Yeah.
way. So.
Yeah.
wow.
Well,
Also,
one more thing I want to add to that. Andrew Pike told me that, and it was interesting because at the time the incident happened, there were these EM generators that the British government had. And he said they were utilizing those to provoke the phenomenon through the tunnels. But right after the News of the World he hit, actually Margaret Thatcher classified those generators. So those generators were classified, secret or top secret, whatever. So you couldn't look into what those generators were capable of after the Rendlesham Forest incident hit the newspapers in England.
I think that's what upset Andrew Pike, and why he stopped investigating down there was because they were provoking the plasma in them tunnels.
wow, never knew that. Have you heard that one before, Elaine? Not heard that before.
Alex, have you ever read the Rendlesham File by Andrew Pike?
No, I haven't. No.
That's a massive, massive volume, and you should get hold of a copy. There's still copies about. I might be able to find you one.
All right.
Very,
Cheers,
very
Ronnie.
interesting. Yeah.
I didn't.
A lot of deep research in there for the time. But I don't know whether he got a little bit worried or whether he was told to shut up. I think he got close to the mark on a lot of things in that book.
Yeah, I mean, I was living in London that time, but it was the News of the World. That's right. It came out, News of the World, and didn't have a clue where it was. And then on my first visit there at Rendlesham, that was probably a strange time for me because we were on track 12. And I've said this before. I know Derek was with me. Derek, Elaine's brother, was there. And a man told me, "Would you please leave the ancients and aliens alone?"
I've heard other people had similar messages there as well.
I was gone.
Yeah.
And I didn't go back. I didn't go back for a couple of months, but then I started to go back there again. Of course, I've been going ever since. But yeah, I don't know what that was all about. I've seen strange things in their lights, same as everyone else. But all of a sudden, it's gone very quiet. The other thing is, John, about the light, the lasers that were supposed to have come down from, I don't know, a UFO that knocked out the weapon system. Is that correct, or was that something made up?
I think I'm sorry, John.
The microphone's gone off. John's gone.
You're muted, John.
You're muted.
Yeah, I do mute when I'm not talking. Colonel Hall worked with a U.S. researcher called Robert Hastings, and Robert Hastings his angle was nukes that have been affected by UFOs. Okay, so Hall got involved with Hastings. Hastings came up with the major, and I'm just recanting what they said, not what I'm saying. Okay, so don't put me on the spot that I said this happened. This is what happened through Hastings, Hall, and this major. So according to Hastings, this major came forward to him and said that there were nuclear weapons stored at Bentwaters. Okay. There was a team, I know this much, they did come in on a C5 on Sunday night after our event that landed at Bentwaters, and the plane ended up in the staging area out by the WSA. But he said that a team came in and two of the what they called tactical nukes. This is, again, not me saying or confirming it. This is just the story that came out. The two of the tactical nukes codes had been altered inside the storage area, okay? And that the nukes were removed and sent back to Kirkland. Now, Halt got involved with Hastings and came back and said he spoke with the major, and again, Halt always will neither confirm or deny if there are nukes there, but he confirmed the story saying that he believed the major and he believed that the nukes codes were altered. So this all came from Hastings, this unidentified major, and Colonel Halt, that at some point two of the tactical nukes were damaged.
Interesting. I've got a question here from Joe. Do you think the activity in the area has some kind of connection with the history of the area?
I do.
Oh, is that it? Okay. It had to do probably with the history, but it also had to do with the fact that the governments were aware of the history and what was going on, and they were creating a lot more effects than would be normal, prior to. So a lot of what was going on was being triggered by the government, to include the fact that in our book, when Keats talks about the fact that during those 3 nights, they were bringing a Russian satellite down also. So all the technology being utilized to trigger the satellite to be brought down, which was brought down right there off the coast, okay, would have had an effect on what we were experiencing, what went on.
Ah, okie dokie. Got another question here from Gene. Mini wormholes. Interesting. The UAG radiation should have proved the wormhole theory. What, I don't know what UAG radiation is.
Neither do I, but let me look. I'll give her an answer.
There it is. It's come up.
Sorry for the dead air time, but
that's okay.
I'm just trying to see what it is.
Yeah, UAG.
UAP.
Does she meant UAP radiation?
That's why I'm wondering. UAP.
Okay, well, we'll go with the UAP radiation. The UAP radiation is terahertz radiation, which is a finger of UAPs being there. So, yes, there was UAP radiation involved because Condyne itself said so.
So that was just day 2 then, guys. Was it? How many days did this go on for?
At least 3, maybe more.
Did it?
So the 3rd night is the famous Holt, the Holt incident. That started off in the afternoon when Lieutenant Bruce England, under instructions of Conrad, who was the base commander, was sent to go and visit the disaster preparedness officer, Munro Neville's. And he went there and Munro Neville's was there with his 3-year-old daughter, and Bruce England has gone in there and says, is there anyone else in the house? And so Munro Neville said, no, only my 3-year-old daughter. Well, does she understand what I'm saying? And he said, well, I don't know unless you tell me what you're going to say. And he said, well, I'm here under the instructions of the base commander. He wants us to go in and do an investigation in the forest to the landing site. And brain freeze. And so they went off into the forest and they eventually found a phenomena there, some lights, and they seemed to be interacting with them. When they opened the car door, the lights got brighter, and when they closed it, it got dimmer. And so they went back to the party was at the Woodies bar, where all the officers and that were meeting for an end of the year pat on the back party. And so they just finished the main course, and Bruce England and Munro Neville's go there and asked to speak to Conrad, and he told them that the phenomena was back. And so Holt says, what's back? And they said, well, the UFO is back. And so he says, do to Munro Neville's. Conrad says, do this warrant further investigation? And he says, yes, it does. So then Holt had to muster a team together to go out and then investigate it in the forest. And so there's a little bit of discrepancy here because Munro Neville's was already there, but Colonel Holt says that he rung up Sue Jones, Captain Sue Jones, who was the head of the disaster preparedness, and asked who was available. And she said, well, Munro Neville's is available. Well, anyway, he went out there. He went and got a Geiger counter and a camera because he was quite a good photographer and he used to take photographs for the base photo magazine. Bobby Ball went out there. Adrian Bustinza went out there, although Colonel Holt denied he was ever there for a long, long period. And who else went out there, John?
Lieutenant England. Lieutenant England was out there.
Lieutenant England. There's someone else.
England Ball. Hall,
yeah.
Bustinza were
and Holt. Yeah,
and
5.
Holt,
yeah. So they go out there when Holt gets down to what they called the staging post, where they'd had lighthouse there. There was people milling around everywhere, and Holt flipped out a bit. He said, "If the English find out about this, this will be a disaster. We shouldn't be out here." So anyway, he told everyone to stay back who weren't supposed to be there, to stay back at the staging post. In the meantime, John had made his way out there with a couple of people and had asked them to join up with them, in which Holt said, no, not at this time, which that was all overheard on the Holt tape, which through his theory that John wasn't never out there on that third night. Anyway, they go out into the forest and they see this light that's moving about in the field. And they said, it looks like an eye winking at you. That seemed like to be under control. That was a control thing. So anyway, as they go towards it, that moves towards them. And so they freak out a bit. Then it goes back into the field. And this is where Colonel Holt says that silently exploded into... No, I've missed a bit out. Colonel Holt was worried about the people in the cottages down there because the orange light was shining in the windows. And he thought, that they might have been in danger. As they go into the field, this light that looks like an eye winking at you is said to explode into 3 white lights and disappeared. It's not on the Holt tape anywhere. I'm not sure whether that happened then or whether I wondered if it happened to John's incident with Adrian, because Adrian said it exploded into white lights. Anyway, that disappeared. They go out into the field to see if they can find any trace of what was in of the UFO had left behind, or UAP, we should say. There's nothing there at all, only cowpats everywhere. So they then go across the road, past the cottages, into the next field. And by this time, they're now seeing lights up to the south and to the north that were like moving in a controlled fashion. One of them comes towards them, stops immediately above them, and sends down a beam of light to the feet of Holt, and he don't know, is this a weapon, is this a warning? He didn't know what it is. All the while he's radioing in at the base saying what's going on, and they're just saying, you're the only person who can see it, we can't see nothing going on. And so he's getting no answers. Recent years, Monroe Neville's has said that incident never happened, no beam of light come down to the feet. It's taken him all these years to say that, but there might have been a bit of a disagreement between the two of them, but he's adamant that part of the story never happened. And so from there, Holt is so frustrated that he's getting no answers from anywhere. He makes his way back across the field, through the forest to the staging post where John is waiting there. Do you want to take it from there, John?
Well, there's a couple of things to add to that. The beam of light that came down to his feet, pretty much right after that happened, we had a blue light streak towards us, go past us, go through a pickup truck that somebody jumped into, and shoot back up into the sky. As it passed us and went towards the truck, there were some lighthouse that Holt talked about that didn't work. The lighthouse briefly lit up and went off. And then they shot up into the truck, up to the sky. The blue light did. The interesting thing was that was when the story got blown out of proportion, that somebody freaked out and kicked a window out of the truck. That didn't happen. The person jumped into the truck because it scared the crap out of him. And he got into the truck, and it shot through the truck and went up into the sky. And that would have been Chris Arnold. So he's been one of those guys that came out and said nothing really happened, but it happened. And the other guy that was with me, I have emails from him that he's actually retired now because he went into government work afterwards. But I'd asked him if he remembered that, and he said, yeah. I've got the emails to confirm that Chris got scared and jumped into a truck from something that wasn't ever happened. He said nothing ever happened out there, but Chris was scared enough to jump into a truck and then snap some pictures of whatever was out in the sky. So after that happened, we met up. I met up, Arnold and I and the other guy met up with Halt's team. At that point, in the distance, you could see this like white, orangish, hueish light coming down into the trees, into the forest out in front of us, and kind of looked like it was moving towards us. Halt asked me if that's what I saw the first night, and I told him, I said, it's too far away to tell exactly if that's what we dealt with the first night. So he authorized Bustinza to go with me. So I was in civilian clothes. Bustinza was on duty. Bustinza had a radio. So we started off in a slow trot towards whatever this was. As we were heading towards it, it seemed to get closer to us. And at that point, I had the radio. I took the radio from Bustinza, and I was talking to the WSA tower at Bentwaters. And I asked them if we could go ahead and proceed up to the object, and they said, go for it. So we started running faster, and this is where everything gets strange. I remember getting close to it, and then all of a sudden it was gone. But I do remember as we were running towards it, Adrian went to the ground, and he claims he was pushed to the ground, and then something held him there. And what Adrian said, he saw me go into the light, which I think was a time dilation bubble, and disappear for a while. And then the bubble itself came over part of him, and then it disappeared with. I actually reappeared, is what I should say. It disappeared as I reappeared, and then we got up. So he saw me go into this, what I think is a time dilation bubble, and disappear for a while. And the interesting thing is that that's another whole story about the government and my injuries. But both Adrian and I were compensated by the government for what happened out there that night. So the government's acknowledged that we were involved in an event at Rendlesham Forest, and we were injured by whatever we encountered.
Oh, that's a new one.
John, when Adrian said that you disappeared, he described it to me like that was like watching a snowy scene on a television, old black and white televisions, and that you just actually dissolved away, and momentarily there was a craft there.
Yeah, but Adrian had mentioned that. I think actually that there was like some kind of craft or something there. If thinking back on it now, but I don't think he mentioned that in the book, though. I think he just said I disappeared.
No, I think he just probably told us.
Yeah, I think, but he did say in the book that he saw me disappear. So.
Oh, first I've heard that one.
Well, then you did read the whole book because Adrian's account is exactly in there, exactly what he saw happen that night.
So the other interesting thing from that is that when John and Adrian, they're now walking back to where Holt is, and they're saying to each other, whatever happened, both of them can't remember anything for the next 12 or 14 hours. Is that correct, John?
I don't really remember much other than looking at him and starting to walk back. And then the next thing I remember really well is standing out at the post office on Sunday night, watching the airplane land from Langley. So I don't have a very good memory from early in the Sunday morning all the way till Sunday night. And Adrian said the same thing. So
yeah, Adrian told me he couldn't remember getting back from the forest to the base. He knew he either drove or someone drove him, but he can't remember anything about that.
Wow. So much going on there. Just got some more questions here somewhere. This one from Joe. What is your take on the objects shot down over Canada this month?
You got any answers, Ronnie?
Well, they were from China.
I mean, the three objects that the government's really never said much about. The only thing I found interesting was that the NORAD commander came out on that press conference on that Sunday and said you couldn't rule out that it could be UFOs or aliens or whatever. I don't remember exactly the words you used. And the other interesting thing was that I'm friends with one of the writers, the head writers at the Roswell Daily, which was the original newspaper that actually covered the Roswell incident. So they're still in existence. And he contacted me because I did a show with him, and he's actually getting ready to put an article out, which we can go into about the whole after stuff that went on. But they were actually invited personally to attend that press conference. Normally the press corps is notified that's on a list, but they were actually, the DOD asked them to attend the press conference where the 4-star general said it couldn't rule out that it could be aliens. So that was just an interesting moment. But then the next day there was cleanup on aisle 9 when they did kind of a combination of the Phoenix Lights, where the press lady came out and said, absolutely, there's no evidence it's UFOs or aliens or whatever. The press all kind of laughed, and that kept Kirby from being asked by the press corps, what did the general mean by that you couldn't rule out that it was aliens. So, but they were actually invited to this press conference when he did divulge that they couldn't rule it out. So the government's never really said. In fact, I think they came back and said they stopped searching for it. They couldn't recover anything. So it's interesting. They would shoot at something. They had no idea what it was. They missed with one of the missiles, and then they had no idea how to recover any of what they had. So I don't know. Good question. But there's a lot of mystery to it. That's how we can leave it at.
Watch this space, eh? From Bill. Does John have any memory of actually seeing any aliens after he disappeared?
Okay. If he's talking about on night 3 with Adrian, no. I just remember getting close to it, and then it was gone. Whatever I was close to disappeared. So, and I don't believe there were actually aliens as the government's made us believe what aliens are out there at all over those 3 nights. So.
You know, I've asked this question before. You know, I said, there don't seem to be any photographs of anything that happened that night. And yet, you've written in the book, John, as well, there was some guy out there who'd taken like hundreds of photographs. But we've never seen any. Well, I haven't never seen any.
Well, Christopher Arnold said he took some pictures, and that's kind of when he came out, was trying to debunk the whole thing. First of all, back then, he had a 35 millimeter camera, and film wasn't cheap back then. So my first point to him was, what were you doing snapping pictures of something in the sky or in the distance if there was nothing there? Would you, A, waste the film on it, and B, then he had it developed and he claimed that nothing came back. But there also is, Ronnie, I think you could go into that. There's a picture that surfaced of an object that a certain person that claimed they were involved in this incident put forth. Do you remember that? That kind of looked like a little bit like what my actual drawing and my statement looked like. It kind of looked like it was one of those pictures that you were like, whoa, that kind of looked a little bit like what I remember seeing in drawing. So I don't know where that came from. I probably at one point I may have seen where it came from, but I do know that picture did pop up at one point.
Yeah, that was on special film that weren't normally available to the public. But the other photographs, because Jim Penniston took a full roll of photographs around the craft that he said he'd done the investigation around. He handed them into the base photo lab and was told they all come back fogged. Monroe Neville's, he was a keen amateur photographer, so he took countless photographs, and he had his own dark room, and they all came out fogged, which helped. But in the early investigations, when Brenda met up with Jim Penniston, he told her he had photographs.
A few weeks, well, a month or so ago, photographs come up on the internet. Apparently, they were from a poacher.
Oh, that was rubbish. That weren't even Rendlesham Forest. No, if you look at the trees, they were trees that don't even grow in this country.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I just saw it
the
come
gaps
up
between the trees didn't tally up. That was That was just another.
Yeah, but these were just lights.
Yeah.
Lots of
Yeah, I've seen them, but if you
lights
look
here.
at the trees, the bark on the trees, they're not the trees that grow in Rendlesham
All
Forest.
right.
Yeah.
Apparently, he was somebody who used to go in there poaching quite a lot.
Yeah, I'm sure there was people who went in there poaching.
But what he said was, if he got caught, I thought, well, I wouldn't have thought anyone would really take much notice of you being in there poaching.
What's a poacher doing, taking the camera into with him?
Well, there you go, yeah.
I think it's just another one of them wannabe stories.
Yeah. Well, there
like
you go.
Full of manure. That's supposed to be a truck full of manure burning. You know, there's been all sorts of stories along the line. People adding bits on.
Yeah,
all sent to throw a red herring and deceive you and get you looking down the wrong road.
Yeah.
You know, like the pile of cow manure or the axle, Apollo capsule. But interesting enough, that particular thing that they said was the Apollo capsule probably was a satellite that was being hoisted out and brought over to the 67.
The conical thing that the helicopter hit the runway lights with.
Yeah, but that probably was a satellite that they were lifting
probably,
out.
Yeah.
So, but they used to cover the Apollo satellite. But we could go into the after part if you'd like to, Alex, where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, I've just got a question from, I think it's all interesting, from Mike. He's saying, John, just to clarify something, you said in your interview with Christina Gomez, you said you drove up to the main road from Eastgate, turned around and then went left into the forest. When did you feel the static atmosphere at the road or in the forest?
Well, Mike's putting them both together. When we first left the Eastgate, we went straight down the road. When you get down to the end of the Eastgate Road, the road that leads up to the Eastgate, there's a road and you go left or right. So it's like a T. What we did at first was we just went and we got to the end of the road and he turned the car around like he was making a U-turn, and I opened up my car door to take a closer look into the forest. That's where the static electricity and stuff, you could feel that effect. And it concerned us enough that we were seeing the lights and that effect was there, that we better get back up to the base and call it in. Now, the second part is when we left the base, Peniston and I at Cabansec, we went down to the end of the road, took a right, and then the logging road on the left, we turned left into and went into the forest, where we went so far and had to just get out of the vehicle, climb over a fence, and then continue on into the forest.
Okie dokie. So that's the third night then. First, second, and third nights.
That was the first night when we first saw it.
That was the first night.
Yes.
But we've covered all 3 nights now.
So you covered all 3 nights now. So, but that wasn't the end of it, was it? Or was it?
Well, I mean, there's all kinds of things that happened afterwards. Initially, right after the event, some stuff got leaked out at a party with Brenda Butler and Dodge Street by what was his name, Ronnie? I'm having a senior moment.
J.D. Ingalls.
J.D. Ingalls showed up at a party right afterwards and was talking about aliens in the forest. So that got Dot and Brenda on the case. Eventually joined by Jenny Randalls. All kinds of stuff went on with them looking into it. Ronnie's got all the notes, the interviews and stuff. And what happened from there was then some people in the States got involved through a guy by the name of Larry Warren that got booted out of the Air Force, came back to the States and started talking about it. They did a FOIA, and somehow, for whatever reason, the United States government acknowledged the FOIA with the Halt memo. When the Halt memo hit, that's when everything hit the fan, because for the longest time, the MOD was denying anything happened to Brenda and Dot and Jenny Randalls. Nothing happened. Nothing was going on. They actually went to Whitehall at one point. And then when the memo came out, then they went back up there, and that's when News of the World hit. And that's when everybody's life changed from that point going forward, with what I call investigators trying to figure out what happened to us. So in the States, my phone started ringing from across the world. Dot Street, Brenda called me. The people in the States, Red Boucher and Scott Colburn, they ran me down. But CNN's the one that got a hold of me where I had to let the base know. And they tried to interview me, but I wouldn't talk on camera. So the story evolved from there. I mean, all kinds of things started coming out, going forward. Halt and Penniston retired and then started talking about it. So, I mean, Ronnie, if you want to fill in some of the blanks before I go into what happened to me later on.
No, you carry on, John.
Okay. So you had all this going on. Different things were being said. Different investigations were done. A whole bunch of books were written. Documentaries were done and everything else. But where it gets interesting for me was coming up on the 30th anniversary. Okay. So I came together with Jim Penniston and I said there was a lot of fighting going on. Halt he's always kind of ran the show. He worked with Georgina Bruni in her book. Georgina Bruni was the one that first exposed Halt lying when it came down to Adrian DeMine's involvement. And then the tape that she got analyzed, the Halt's tape actually proved it, started proving his story started disintegrating from that, with Adrian and I being on the tape. But anyway, so my goal was the 30th anniversary was coming up. We were going to come back over and also to get as many people together as we could. Well, that pretty much fell apart, other than Penniston and I did come back over, and we came over with a company called Prometheus Entertainment, which did a show called Ancient Aliens. So we came over, we did a conference. That's when the world was introduced to the binary code. We met, we did the conference, we went out in the forest, we met with people. It was a very fun time to go back over it and be back over there. So then when I left and I came back, I started feeling sick. And it would have been about a month or so later, I got so sick, I ended up in the hospital with congestive heart failure and AFib. Now, prior to this, right after the event, I didn't feel well and ended up they found out I had a heart murmur, which I didn't have coming in because I couldn't have had it. They diagnosed me with a heart murmur, and I got taken to Wright-Patterson where a whole bunch of tests were done. So on those grounds, and then later my eyes started acting up, I ended up being evaluated at Wolford Hall, and they felt I was exposed to radiation. But putting that all together with the event, I didn't at the time. I just didn't. I knew I didn't feel well. But in 2011, after I got sick, my heart doctor, the civilian heart doctor, felt that the issues I was having with my heart and the damage to my heart didn't match up. And you have to deal with insurance in the States, and they'll only go so far with symptoms. Like they won't do this test, they won't do that test if this test shows back negative. But the long story short was he wanted to see my initial records from the initial injury. So I requested through Senator Kyle's office for my personnel records and my medical records. And they put a formal inquiry in, and the inquiry came back to the senator's office stating my records weren't where they were supposed to be. So they followed up, and they were able to get a little bit of my personnel records to include a DD Form 214. Only DD Form 214 they released was showing I was in from 1982 going forward. And my medical records, they couldn't get their hands on. So at that point, she sent me a letter stating that my records were classified and I had to file for disability to force the government to acknowledge my records existed and to review them. So we did that, but they got no response back, nor did I get in to see the VA to be evaluated. Senator Kyle retired. Senator McCain took over the case. They got me in for my initial, review of my damage. And the doctor looked at me and said, "That's interesting. Everything you're describing to me couldn't have happened then." And I looked at her and I said, "Why is that?" And she said, "You weren't in the Air Force in 1979. So you didn't even come in until 1982. I have all the records in front of me stating that." I said, "Okay, well, what about these pay records and my entry physical in 79? She looked at her eyes, got real big. She says, "Well, that's above my pay grade." She goes, "I can only write up what I know." And she said, "I'll write up a recommendation." So a couple of months later, I got denied my whole claim got denied based on the fact the United States Air Force, which I have the documents and I've shown in presentations, stating that I wasn't even in the Air Force during the time frame it happened. So at that point, we had to appeal the case, which we did. We put a bunch of FOIA out to include asking a direct question, were my records classified, because we have proof that there was a classified record section. And the thing is that they wouldn't acknowledge our FOIA. And in fact, the appeal agency I went through was a state agency that had access to some of my files, showed what few records they gave to McCain's office were only about 10% of what the government held. So they were lying to the senator when they even told him that these are the records we have on him. So we did another FOIA, okay? So during that time frame, there was a hearing in the States. I don't know if you guys heard about it over in England, but there was a guy by the name of Steve Bassett that was doing, at the time, what they called a mock hearing. It's called the Citizens Hearing. And what he was doing was recreating what would probably happen if there was ever a hearing in front of the United States Congress. So they got a bunch of ex-members of Congress and they held like a hearing, okay? So myself, Peniston, my attorney, Pat Frasconia, and Nick Pope were on the panel. So we were like a real panel that would be involved if you went in front of Congress. There was a British government guy that claimed he worked in the government, knew about UFOs. Peniston and I, who had our experience, and our attorney, well, actually he was my attorney, but at the time Jim was acting like he was his. But we testified in front of these group of people. And I presented evidence to them showing that I was injured. And so did Jim. Jim said he was injured. And he already admitted during the testimony that he was actually receiving disability through the government. And I presented all the evidence and documents showing my records were classified, I was injured, and everything else. Well, they were so moved by that they formed a letter that they sent to President Obama telling him to get him directly involved in my case. That was signed by all of them. And then they also sent a letter to the VA. Well, right after that, when we got out, we came back to where we lived. My attorney got a phone call from a CIA guy that wanted to come and visit him and go over some stuff with him. So the guy came down to Jackson, Mississippi and visited him and laid out. He had a pretty good idea what was going on, what had happened, and wanted to meet with Peniston and I. And so eventually he went and came and met with me in Sedona, with Pat and his wife, who's also an attorney and a nurse, evaluated me and told Pat that I didn't have much longer to live. And this was why all this was going on with the VA and stuff, because we put our appeal in, and the guy by the name of Christopher Green, which is in the book, actually said that we were going to file a federal lawsuit, actually having them justify why my records were classified. So this was all going on. The appeal was in progress. So then he wrote a letter to the government, to the VA, and to the DOD, explaining exactly what happened to me and my injuries, which then led to the government taking me in and treating me for my injuries and giving me life-saving surgery. But also along the way, the next thing that happened was we were finally able to go through different avenues and prove that I was in the Air Force in 1979. So at that point, they said, withdraw the appeal, okay? And we'll go ahead and take the new evidence. And the staffer that was handling it through McCain felt that I was going to get my disability. So that was all going on at the same time. I had my surgery. And then after my surgery is when I had my surgery. All right. Then moved from Arizona to Illinois. And the appeal was withdrawn right before I moved back. And we submitted the new evidence. And I told Cheryl at the time, I said, this isn't over. All of a sudden, about a month after that, I got a letter from the government saying, thank you for withdrawing your appeal. The case is closed. So that's when it got real ugly, because McCain himself got personally involved and said, wait a minute, you guys said if we gave you the new evidence, he would be taken care of. And well, no, we're not. And he said, well, then I'm going to open up hearings into the whole event. And some other stuff went on. We did an IG complaint. And after all this took place, what eventually happened was early in 2015, the government granted me full disability, acknowledging based on what we put in, submitted for my injuries, what they were and where it happened was in the line of duty in Rendlesham Forest. And we submitted Project Condign and some other documents that we had to include documents that were given to us by the CIA guy, that we submitted all this, and I was granted full disability. So at that point, the United States government took responsibility for my injuries and acknowledged that I was injured in the line of duty, during the event. What they didn't do was say what exactly injured me. In other words, the documents they accepted it was UAP radiation, which is now what the government says UFOs are, but they never officially acknowledged to me what it was. That's including what the both aides said was the fact that they were going to probably get the care I deserved, but I wasn't going to ever get told what happened. So then if you go further into the book, Christopher Green went on a site called Above Top Secret and laid out 3 paragraphs of what my injuries were, what caused it, and that my injuries were actually had to do with the special access programs. And he had only seen records in his career, and I state this, in his career, that he had access to that were classified were Adolf Hitler's, John F. Kennedy's, and mine. Those are the only records he had ever seen that were locked down like they were. So he acknowledged that not only was he involved, but that my records were classified. So the United States government tried to pull a fast one and say I wasn't even in the Air Force. And to this day, my medical records are still classified.
Well, not much you say, is there really, Ron?
No. It's pretty amazing, really, when you think what John went through. Nearly died.
Exactly.
If it hadn't been for Kit Green, who could have been involved in other ways as well, because there were some...
well, go ahead and don't tease people. Tell them.
No, I don't know if after the different events, one of the airmen was tasked to take the airmen to this CIA, and what would we call him, doctor? And they were interrogated, let's say. And we do know that there was interviews conducted under hypnosis as well, and sometimes using truth drugs like sodium pentothal or Amatil and stuff like that. So obviously these airmen wouldn't know much about that, except this one person couldn't be hypnotized, and she can remember the people who were taken to the cleanup doctor, and one of them people included Colonel Holt.
Right. Because that brings me up to this thing is talking about all this, about obviously what they call the Men in Black.
Mm-hmm.
And I was reading the stins on it, Adrian.
Mm-hmm.
He said, or he put in the book, that he'd had problems with the Men in Black.
Yeah, his family did.
His family did. That's right.
Turned up on his road, and his family were all military people. His dad worked for the government, and he's saying to Adrian, "What the hell have you got involved with? Because I've got these black vans parked at the end of the road, and they're interested in what's going on in this house." And he said, "All I done was what my duties. I just done my duties. I hadn't done anything wrong." But they were keeping an eye on him. Not just him, also Ed Cabansack. He hadn't said a lot to anyone because the first time he did speak, and maybe that'd be the CNN. John, would that have been the CNN where Ed spoke?
No, I believe Ed was Bruni tracked him down, and then I think he did James Fox out of the blue. He didn't do I Know What I Saw directly. They just used clips from out of the blue. So those
Yeah.
were the two times
They
he
were the
spoke.
same clips, but straight afterwards he had his own business and he got investigated by the the revenue people, like the
IRS.
IRS,
Yeah.
and so that's why Ed would never say anything else ever again, because he felt like though he was targeted because he spoke out. But
Yeah, I mean, when I read in John's book, about the guys sitting outside Adrian's house, and he was saying, these guys were there to get out with like Ray-Bans on, all the way they're supposed to look, I suppose. And then he was taken, wasn't he, somewhere and was.
That was on base. That was he was.
That was on base, yeah. Where they said, "What did you see?" He told them. And they said, "No, you didn't."
Yeah, he was interrogated really harshly. He kept insisting that he was what he saw, and they're saying no. What you saw was the lighthouse. What you saw was the lighthouse, and that was Adrian who was told bullets are cheap, a dime a dozen.
Right. I was going to say that.
Other people might pick that story up, but in the end, he just would say anything just to get out of there.
Yeah, bullets are cheap.
Yeah, bullets are cheap. Yeah,
it's scary, isn't it?
Yeah, very scary. Yeah, but I mean that goes on. That goes on in the middle. But that in the first time that these airmen and soldiers as well have been treated harshly by their own people. They're supposed to be protecting them. Yeah, Adrian was treated really badly. I mean, to get anything out of Adrian is not easy, is it, John? I mean, when we got him to come on Phenomenon Radio, that was the first radio show he'd ever done. He still won't talk about some things. I mean, not on air, and he's also still very confused. What's real and what's been plugged into him.
Well, I can tell you, I think why that is, Ronnie.
Yeah,
I've kind of done some deep dive in this. I honestly believe, and this is me, that, and it's in the book Larry Warren wrote with Peter Robbins, and Warren's even said that if you took him out of it, the event still happened. He wanted people to talk. That at one point, Bustinza was still at Bentwaters and Warren was getting kicked out and sent home. That they made a pact that Warren would get the story out.
Yeah.
So what happened was that Warren came back to the States, got what was his name? There were two guys, Greenfield. What was his name? Greenfield.
Harry Greenwood.
Greenwood
and Ron someone.
I can't remember the two investigators.
It's cause one. Citizens Against UFO Secrecy.
Right. He started talking, and I think what happened
Larry
was
Fawcett. Sorry, the other
Larry Fawcett.
Yeah.
I think Larry became popular. No one else was talking about the event. This is before News of the World hit. Okay. And Larry started embellishing, the story. And that kind of screwed Adrian over because Larry did agree to get the story out for Adrian because Adrian was still in. And Adrian obviously had problems with his family and stuff. So he was hesitant with that. So what really came down to was Larry twisted the story so much that Adrian has a hard time consolidating everything. Never mind the fact that you have with the fact that what Larry did was that he embellished it so much. And then the infighting between Halt and him, it led to such a problem with people even wanting to step forward and talk about it. So Larry was doing Adrian a favor at first, but then he became real popular and started to live the event like it was his.
Yeah, I met Larry a few times. I thought it was okay. He seemed a decent guy. In fact, I think Larry was first person, I think, to take me down the forest. We met somewhere. Take us in the forest at night. Or he might have been the second guy. But that was a few years ago now, probably 12 years ago, 10, 12 years ago. I haven't seen him since.
A few months ago, we'd done a radio interview with Laurie Redfelt, who was also stationed at Bentwaters. And I was put on the spot, asked to cover the timeline, which is quite a task. There's a lot involved. And I forgot to mention Larry's story, which is in the book. Everything's in. That's his story was in the book. That was unintentional. And we did tonight say that we weren't going to talk about Larry Warren. I did say that. So for them, I
Oops,
get crucified.
sorry.
No, it's okay. I get
I
crucified.
didn't know. I didn't
There'll
know.
be people saying tomorrow, "Oh, they've left Larry out of it again." I done it unintentionally before, and things just evolved, didn't they? So.
Oh well, mentioned him tonight, didn't you? So
Well, actually, I did, but
You did, John.
at the end of the day, here's the deal: there is a big discourse. It started with Halt, and he basically went after Warren for years, and it led to a big problem with other people wanting to talk about the event. So, my personal opinion is that Larry actually was trying to help Adrian out and got caught up in the lights and camera. In fact, it was in Left at East Gate when Chuck DeCarl first contacted me and CNN first got involved. The Air Force actually thought the story that Warren was telling was me. They actually thought that the story that Larry was talking about was actually me talking about it. They told CNN I was a disgruntled airman. But in fact, the truth was I was just at my second base keeping my mouth shut until News of the World hit. And that's when everybody started, or my third base by then. I was at my third base by then, and that's when News of the World hit, and everybody started running me down. And then they quickly realized that was Larry Warren. So when I say that he combined stories, my point is he knew a lot about what happened to Adrian and I. And he did admit in his own book that he spoke with Bustinza, and Bustinza wanted him to get the story out. So my point is he describes quite a bit of things that not only did happen to Adrian and I, but some of the stuff that Adrian was involved with prior to him and I meeting up that night. So that's my feelings about it. It is what it is. And I'm not afraid of any of them. Bring it. I don't care. I was there. So
Adrian had told me that Larry had got his story so much off to a T that he suspected he had to have tape recorded him because he remembered everything what Adrian told him.
So there you go. But I mean, it's like Larry bounces all over the place. Like, well, I'm the whistleblower. Not really. J.D. Ingalls was. He's the first one to bring it out to the investigators that started pursuing this. But I mean, and in reality, he did bring the story out. The question is what hurts Rendlesham somewhat is the fact that Halt went after Warren forever. That caused issues. Now Halt and Penniston are fighting. Neville's is changing the story and fighting with Halt. So you've got all these different people arguing and fighting about what happened and who they were. And I mean, Halt spent 30 minutes of a MUFON presentation a couple of years ago exposing Penniston as a fraud for his code, what his wife told him, what Penniston's ex-wife told him about what Jim was all about and doing all that. So you've got all this fighting going on. But for me, the reason why I wrote the book was because I've tried to do an investigation, working with people like Ronnie, James Warrow, and stuff, and Win Keach, and stuff, and try to figure out what happened to us. You know what I mean? And have I gotten drawn in a little bit with Warren's story? Yeah. I met Larry several times, and what he has to say doesn't add up. Penniston's story doesn't add up. Halt clearly was proven by Bernie that he lied about Bustinza and I's involvement. And the memo's not right. The dates are wrong, which led to all kinds of problems over the years. So the story itself is kind of a mess, but it did happen. The government's acknowledged it happened. I was injured. Adrian was injured, by it. And maybe some other people have some issues too. Penniston said at the hearing that he was getting disability for what happened there. So it affected us. Something went on. But if you look at the book, it had to do with technology and a UAP, whatever that is, and the government's weaponization of it. Because I did a FOIA with the British government who came back to acknowledge my FOIA that they were developing technology off of UAPs, but it was all classified in what they were doing. It's in the book. So the event happened. The sad part about it is people just can't own up to what happened. And I get ridiculed because I don't remember what happened when I got close to it both times. But if you read Condign and what time dilation and stuff is, it will affect what you remember and how you know, as far as what you can and can't remember when you got close to it. Now, I went under hypnosis, which brings out a whole different story. But people are critical of hypnosis. But the hypnosis goes along the lines of what happened, other than it fills in some missing details. But the story itself has issues with the people involved, but it happened. And I feel this book, Weaponization of a UAP, explains a lot of what happened to us and what the government knew and what exactly they're doing with what a UAP is and how they're weaponizing it.
Mm.
Fascinating.
The timeline in the book, Alex, everything in that timeline is not me saying what happened. That's the actual people. That's their words, not what I say could have happened or did happen. That's what I've said. So when I talk about what Jim Penniston remembers, they're his words. When I talk about how John remembers it, they're his words. Colonel Holt, his words. That's not speculation or I think happened. That's their words. They can't all be correct, can they? Because they're different, unless something else is going on.
Yeah,
that's what they're saying. So that's up to everyone to read all the publications that are out there and draw their own.
and make your own mind up.
And make your own mind up. And no one's ever going to agree what happened. You know, I'm not trying to make anyone believe, you know, what happened.
No, Ronnie, the interesting thing is in the book, Holt acknowledged that Win Keach's summary of what took place with the satellite and everything was basically true.
Yeah.
So people, and then not only that, but there's another summary from one of the OSI guys that were involved, lays out a great detail about the agencies were involved, what happened, and everything else. And Holt confirmed that OSI guy was involved with the incident.
Yeah.
So the book itself, it doesn't, like, you have Penniston's book attacks everybody. Okay. Holt's book attacks everybody. The weaponization book doesn't attack anybody. It simply goes with Ronnie's timeline and even talks about Warren. And then it goes into the different things that I experienced. And it goes into the weapons that were the stuff that was being worked on by the British and American government right outside the back gate. And it lays out a pretty clear picture. And then Win Keach's involvement talking about how a satellite was brought down. So the book, the weaponization book, is probably the closest book to what really happened, other than Bruni was able to get everybody on record pretty much, except me, because Holt hid me from her the entire time. She was trying to find me, but Holt knew how to get a hold of me, but she never could find me. I wasn't saying I was completely hid away, but I was pretty well hid. I pretty well kept myself undercover as far as being able to be tracked down, especially after the news of the world broke. So
yeah, well, Colonel Holt told Georgina Bruni that Ed Kabansek was working for the government and that he wouldn't talk to anyone. When she finally traced him down, he was happy to talk to her. He wasn't working for the government. I think he had a health food business or something. He wasn't working for the government. But it seemed like Holt was not wanting her to speak to anyone.
Other than who he wanted, you know, as far as he wanted. Yeah.
Moving on a bit now is I'd not heard of until I read this in John's book was it Burrow Hill?
Yeah,
I'd never heard of this place, but that was another part of the story, wasn't it, John?
Well, Ronnie can describe Burrow Hill. I don't know the history of it or anything, so
I don't know what I've read in the book.
Right, the history of it. That was there was a causeway going out to it. There was an island at one time, a small island, and there was obviously a settlement on it. We found out later when they'd done archaeological digs on there, and there was a track that come from the Butley Priory, is it called?
Priory, yeah,
Butley Priory up to there. So that was from Saxon times onwards. There was always a settlement there. Now, just before 1980, I think 1978, the first time they were taking aggregate from there and using it in the tracks in Rendlesham Forest and around. The landowner was excavating from there, and then they come across all these 200 graves, most of them adult men, some children, few women, and Yeah, that's Butley Hill. Well, that Burrow Hill. That's where John ended up on that night. That's where he was overlooking, and we went there, didn't we, John? And he stood on that hill, and that all came back to him what he was looking at. And
like I said, I always remembered seeing the lighthouse when we got towards the coast, and I remember seeing the lighthouse, and it's the actual seeing it. So we went back and walked the path I thought we went on, and it matched up to what I remember, that part of it. But the interesting thing was, if you look in the book, Wayne Keats took some pictures out there on the hill, and there was some weird orbs in it.
Yeah, we got some weird orbs, orange orb as well.
Yeah, and then also there was a high EM frequency there.
Yeah, that was given a pulse off, Alex.
Yes,
really?
That hill was given a pulse off. Yeah.
So that goes back to something that happened before our event called Cobra Mist. They put a lot of money into putting Cobra Mist there, and there was inland interference that was interfering with Cobra Mist, and they shut it down. Well, interesting enough, Wynn talks about how that pulse and that what's underground there, as far as the EM fields, would affect Cobra Mist, and that's probably the phenomenon that Pandro Pike was studying. That particular area, there's an energy pulse and field underneath that area, and I believe, Ronnie, and this is where I don't want to get it wrong, there are ley lines that go through there too, aren't they?
Yeah, there are. Yeah. Yeah. The thing about the spirits in the forest, and we all know there's spirits in the forest, but most of us have experienced it at some time or another. When they were ripping through that aggregate taking the top off that mound, how many of them bones and bits of body have been spread around the forest?
Well, when you think about it,
there's orbs and
that would have, all those years ago with Sutton Hoo, that would have all been one thing, I would imagine. Sutton Hoo, Rendlesham would have all been.
Yes.
I mean, obviously now you've got roads going through it, but I was there Thursday, and I put a sort of a 300mm lens on my camera. And I've been going down it for all these years. I've never noticed this before until I read this in John's book. And I looked across the farm where the farmhouse is, and I saw a hill. I thought, I've never seen that before. That's obviously Burrow Hill. Must be. Yeah. Never, ever noticed that before.
Yeah. I seen years ago there was a ferry go from there, like a rowing boat ferry.
Yeah.
So it's been inhabited.
Oh, I'll have to try and have a look in here. So, Elaine, there's one of our meetups at
there is a way to it, and you can work out if you go on Google Maps. You can drive quite a way there. The farmer where you'd have to park on the edge of his field is normally quite, so long as you take your litter with you, and it's normally quite open for people to go up there. But that is obviously private land. You've got to respect that. That's his land, but he's never turfed anyone off.
Joe, the valley has been nicknamed by historians as England's Valley of the Kings.
Yeah,
there are so many burial mounds.
Well, there's tumuli in the forest.
Yes, there are.
And when they excavated Sutton Hoo, they never found King Redwell's body or an impression of it. So he probably, if he was buried there, he would have been moved somewhere else.
Yeah.
Perfect place in the forest.
Fascinating, that. I don't think this mystery will ever go away, Really.
I think there's so much more mystery at Rendlesham than just the UFO thing.
But the UFO, I suppose, brought it,
Yeah, of course.
to everyone's attention. And then, but as I've had some experiences in there. And some of the photographs I've taken. And I've never felt in danger, except the first time when whoever it was spoke to me. But it's just a fascinating place,
Well, you do understand, Alex, that there's still an active facility there. That part of Marlsham Heath's still there.
Yeah.
The British side of it's still there. And they have all kinds of equipment, and they work on telecommunications, which would have directly to do with all that went on, these different equipment. And what people don't understand, I'll give an example. The technology that was needed back then, like they at the time they had what they called elephant cages, and one of them was the Chicksands. And I actually had somebody from Chicksands tell me that it was involved in the incident. But today's world, that particular elephant cage has been replaced by a small satellite dish, because the Chicksands was used for communications, command and control, right? So, and they used eventually AWACS planes, but they had a different plane at the time. It was a Navy plane that they used, which I don't have the name of it in front of me, but the AWACS came afterwards. But he said it was involved in the incident, which means there was a coordinated effect going on. But today's world, they use a small satellite dish, and the actual elephant cage is obsolete. And a lot of these radar facilities, these large facilities, are no longer needed. They've made the equipment so much better and smaller that they can still continue things on, including what you still have a facility there, that the British side's still there to this day. And the phenomenon is still there. I mean, when we went back in 10, we got stuff on camera of different things floating around down there in that finger of trees out there in the farmer's field.
Yeah, I must have a little trip down there. Have a little trip down to that farmer's field sometime. But
yeah, that's fenced in. You can get through the other way, can't you? But that's where I had my bad experience, right on the end of that finger of trees.
Yeah,
Scary.
I mean, you know, the orbs that night, the orange orbs. I've seen the orange orbs in there. There was 3 in a car.
Mhm.
That was about 4 years ago. But just curiosity, really. Do you think, somebody asked, we were talking about this a few weeks ago, weren't we, Elaine, with Mike? Do you think anything could have been left there?
Oh,
Alien-wise?
Alien-wise?
Could anything have been left in that forest?
I don't think I could have been left in the forest, because, I mean, the forest has been devastated and then replanted, isn't it? And that's, I mean, that is a farmed forest. That's
definitely, yeah.
Whether something's been buried, I mean, there was a little bit of a hush hush thing went on in that farmer's field where loads of soil was brought in.
Was there?
Yeah.
Well, fascinating, isn't it? Eh?
I'm sure it went to grow carrots. And next thing you know, a fence has gone up.
Yeah.
Interestingly, where that finger of trees is, you know what we're talking about, don't you, Alex? Where the big farmer's field and that finger of trees come out.
Yeah.
To the right-hand side of it, a few years back, the farmer put in irrigation ponds in there. And part of the deal for him to get the permission was, first of all, Suffolk Archaeology had to go along there and do a dig. And they found countless things in there, countless settlements. And they left all the artifacts in situ. Nothing was taken out. That was just that little bit to the right of the finger of the trees. What's in the other part of the field? Because the main Capel Green settlement wasn't even in that field. That was over the road behind the cottages. That little corner piece there. If you look at it, there's like a stream run around. It's like the shape of a horseshoe. But the whole place around there is steeped in history, and all ancient history, not modern history, ancient history. Like I've heard Brenda talk about the ancients. You know, there's a lot of old souls and spirits, isn't there?
Oh God, yeah. Yeah. You know, I've seen things in there. As I said, we was down there in the archery club. You know, I've mentioned it on here. And there was only 2 of us in there practicing. And I needed to practice, guys. I needed to practice. But anyway, a figure came from behind a tree, what they call shadow people.
Yeah.
Went back. And I said, just hold on. And it ran across through the trees. Now, people can believe me, whatever. And somebody on here, I think, said that we had weapons. So this must have been an old character. Who, there were old bows and arrows. I actually witnessed that. Oh, it's an amazing place. Well, not so amazing at the moment. It's very quieter at the moment. But
I've known years when it go like that for ages, and I always found the winter time was very inactive anyway. But when it started warming up around about June and
Hmm.
and also early hours of the morning. A lot of people go home before the activity starts.
Yeah.
You get down there about 3 o'clock in the morning. It's a completely different forest. Not for the faint-hearted.
Definitely not. Kathy, what are your thoughts on the Cable Green Independent documentary film,
John,
Rendlesham Forest UFOs?
You afraid to touch this one, Ronnie?
I ain't going there. No.
Well, Ronnie, answer this part. How long have they been supposedly going to put the film out? That you can answer that one.
I think about 7 years, something like that. You know,
I don't.
No, don't. So, I've done some work with a film company, and films can take up to 20 years. But they announced it to be coming out after a year. Then that was put back 6 months, then 2 years, then another 6 months, then 3 years, and this has been going on and on and on. You know, I hope it do get released. It'd be interesting to watch it.
Yeah, well, I
know there's people in the background waiting for it to come out. Legal people.
There you go.
I forgot about that. Yeah, that film. It was plastered all over the internet, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was. I mean,
I know it's been at least 3 to 4 years. I don't know if it's been that long. All I can tell you is let's see what happens.
I might got that wrong. That might be, but that's been several years.
No, I don't know for sure. It's just like if people are going to ask me about the binary code, I guess there's more to come, according to Gary Osborne, Penniston's handler. So my point being is let Cable Green come out. Yeah. Let the binary code come out. I'm not trying to shut down anybody's story or version, but if you want to ask my opinion of what I think what they've said about certain things or me or something else, I'll give it to you. But ultimately, the best thing to do is, come on, guys, put Cable Green out. I know Gary Heseltine just put a book out, and there's a row between Cable Green and him about that his book was covering a lot of Cable Green. They pulled it, Amazon pulled it, but it's back online again. So there's a fight going on between those two. And I thought maybe it was just publicity. I still think it might have been. But ultimately, put it all out. I worked with Ronnie and James and Wynn, and even David Clark on the last book. And I'm open to discuss it. But let them all put it out and let people make their own calls. I could just tell you my experiences with these people and how I feel about certain things. But I also believe in freedom of the press, and people should put out what they want to put out and let people be the judge.
So, John, you never got interviewed by them?
Well, actually, it was weird. What was the guy's name that showed up that had a controversial girlfriend or?
Oh, yeah. I know what you mean, but I can't think of his name.
He contacted me, and Lloyd Reifelt was kind of involved, and they actually asked me if I would do an interview for him. And of course, Nick Pope and some other people got upset that I would even acknowledge Cable Green. And I just wrote back to him and I said, yeah, I will submit a set of questions that I will be willing to talk about. And the agreement has to be that whatever you ask me, all my questions or whatever has to be put in full content. It can't be, edited. It has to be, you ask me a question and my answer is put out. It's not chopped up or utilized improperly. I said, I'll work with you on that. And they never got back to me. So I wasn't afraid to go on and talk about what I knew, but they didn't want, and that was offered by I forget his name now, but he was supposed to be working with the project at the time. And then some people behind the scenes killed it. So they didn't want to interview me. So.
Yeah, I don't think they've interviewed Penniston. I
know Penniston or Halt refused. I believe. Yeah. I think they asked them to do it, knowing they'd say no. But I think they were caught off guard that I would come on. Sure. Yeah. You want to? We'll set up the questions and I'll answer them. But they have to be fully. There has to be the question followed by my answer. It can't be edited, and they didn't want to do that. So.
No. Colonel Holt isn't. Colonel Holt isn't spoke to him.
Be interesting when it comes out, won't it?
Yeah.
Well, don't hold your breath, okay?
The thing is, to have a documentary about Rendlesham and not have the main characters who are involved, who's Jim Penniston, John Burroughs, and Colonel Holt in, missing the point a bit. I know they spoke to people who were on the fringes, and not to do with the RFI, but before and after, and
Well, but Ronnie, honestly, I'm not trying to discredit what you're saying, but if you want to come up with some other witnesses, you want to make Larry Warren your feature witness, fine, do it. You know what I'm saying? I don't have to be involved. They reproached me, somebody did, and asked me to do it. And when I said, yeah, but under these conditions, they didn't want to interview me all of a sudden. But the point is it's just like my book. There's going to be people that are against James and I's and Ronnie's book, as far as what we did. They may not like what we said or whatever. That's fine. So I'm not against anybody putting something out. Just, be prepared. Put your big boy pants on, because there's going to be sides coming at you from every which way, going after what you had to say, But the interesting thing about the weaponization book, there was not much negative about it, was there, Ronnie? I mean, I don't think a lot of people knew what to do with the book. They didn't.
I know, as far as the timeline goes, they can't, because it's all in their own words, so they can't argue about what they've said themselves.
Right. I mean, and that's
I've not had any criticism about that.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is, certain people, and I won't name names, forgot what they said in the past.
Yes,
and it comes back to haunt them later. It comes back to haunt them later when they said something earlier, and then, oops, there's proof that now that what they're saying isn't what they said earlier, or what they said earlier, there's evidence to support what they didn't say earlier, including like Colonel Hall himself. He tried to deny that Bastenza and I were ever involved, and that was proven wrong.
Yeah.
There's a question some people may want to ask. I was at a conference at Woodbridge, first one I ever went to, about 12 years ago, and there was I don't know if he was a colonel, anyway, some quite high up guy, and he was talking about somewhere in America where a similar thing happened at Woodbridge, apparently, was like a craft come over the base.
Was Captain Salas.
Where was it?
That was Captain Salas who was talking about it. Yeah, where the craft come over and closed down 20-minute missiles one after the other.
But did you witness those beams coming down, talking about the weapons systems in Woodbridge, John?
There was no weapon systems in Woodbridge.
Oh, there weren't?
No, there's all in Bentwaters.
Oh, so Ronnie tells you, Ronnie's saying there were weapons there. What I can tell you is this. I can tell you what's been publicly put out, okay? Prior to 79, it's all over the place. And in actuality, I can say this much too. People claim that in the UK, nuclear weapons were not allowed to be put in there by the Americans. In fact, the nuclear weapons were not in the United Kingdom in different locations, including Green and Common, under a treaty between Great Britain and America. It was a NATO treaty. So any of the weapons, including Glickham, that was put in and has been acknowledged for being there, and the weapons prior to 1979, they had a weapons storage area at Woodbridge and Bentwaters. Woodbridge, they had F4s on alert with nuclear weapons. They actually had the weapons loaded on aircraft. That's all been made public, okay? And the weapons storage at Woodbridge was utilized for those weapons. Now, the Bentwaters weapons were there if they brought in more aircraft and uploaded them, okay? But after the F4s left and all that got shut down, then the mission changed and the A-10s came in, were the primary mission at Bentwaters, Woodbridge. They had them at both locations, and there was no weapons storage area at Woodbridge anymore active.
The clues are in the old maps of, if you look at them, of the Woodbridge and the Bentwaters bases, because on the Bentwaters base that says weapons storage area, and in Woodbridge base that says non-nuclear weapons storage area.
Right.
But that was after 79. Prior to that, and in fact, there was the interesting thing about it was at the time I was there, it was the largest TAC fighter wing in the Air Force. Mm-hmm. But that Woodbridge one had a huge canine section because they didn't have the sensors and stuff that they did after I got there that they used in weapon storage areas. So that whole Woodbridge area was patrolled by K9, including the alert area. And if you look at the Google satellite of it, you'll see both facilities look the same. They both had towers. They both had entry control points. They had double fences. And you could see over by the 67th where the alert area was for the F4s.
Oh, let's have a look at those. What we got here? Bill, Ronnie, friend of me from Scotland, talking to an Iron Age elder in the forest. Bill took a picture 20 feet away, all 3 feet large in size, and a beige colour was lit up over his right shoulder. Oh, that was down there as well.
Yeah. Hello, Alien Bill.
Yeah, Alien Bill there.
Yeah, yes.
Oh, there's my mum, Lynn. I swear to you, your face was transfigured into my dad's face. Oh, no, not again. My face keeps transfiguring, apparently. Oh, don't want too much of that.
Are you a shapeshifter, Alex?
Well, I don't know. All I know is that actually I'll show you if I've got them on here. I'll let you see it. There you go, John. Is that shape shifting? I don't even know it happens.
No, neither do I. That's for a different radio show.
Yeah. So I don't know if you called it shape shifting. I don't know what it's called really. Bit scary though, isn't it? I think it just turns like that. But
yeah, it's definitely an interesting picture.
Yeah, I've got a few of those, mate. No, honestly. Some weird stuff in that forest as well. Some weird photographs in there.
Oh no, there's no doubt that area has an eerie feeling to it. It always has. I mean, I've been back. I came back for the 30th. I came back for Strange but True, but never got down to the forest. Came back for the 30th, and I came back for the filming of the. I've been back 3 times, and each time it still has the weird feeling when you go out there. There's something at night. So it's not so much during the day, but there's a picture on my Facebook page that if you go and look at it, that's a picture of my son. He's standing there with Gordy's dog. And that's the weird effect that the camera had, with him standing there in the darkness on the trail in the forest.
I think that was my photo.
Yeah.
Oh, was it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a weird picture, isn't it?
Yeah, spooky.
Yeah, I've been down there at night for a couple of years, but like you say, Ronnie, I don't know anymore. Don't know what's in there now. But things change, don't they?
There's definitely some areas. I'm sure there's people listening who know where they are, where the forest is more ancient. Not with the pine trees and that, the old oaks and places like that. They're the spookiest places.
Yeah. I said to Elaine that when we go down there, it's gone very quiet. And I said, I think you're going to have to move further into the forest, go deeper.
Yes.
Deeper into it.
Yeah, that might have been since they've had that UFO trail around the forest, and it's been tramped by hundreds of people and a lot of negative people as well, because not all. That must have an effect.
So it's only the last 18 months it's gone like this, really. But there you go. It'll pick up again, won't it? I'm sure.
Well, you never know, do you?
I'll go down there and transfigure when the tourists turn up.
That'll not help business very well. So, do you have any other questions for us? Because I think we're about done, aren't we?
I don't know. It's been a fascinating evening, I've got to say. I can't think of anything.
Well, I can I add a little pitch then?
Yeah, of course.
I'm working on a series. It's on the UNX network. It's on 7 to 9 Friday nights on the UNX network, and you can also look at it on YouTube. It's put up on YouTube afterwards. It's called It's called Phenomenon Radio: Weaponization of a UAP. Now, we do 2 shows a month where we're going into the details of what we think went on. We're laying out the technology. We're laying out the people that would be involved with the technology and stuff. And then the other weeks, we run the Old Phenomena radio show that Ronnie was a guest on several times, where we had different interviews with different people, including Adrian Bastenza, Larry Warren, Peter Robbins, Colonel Halt, and some of the other people that we had come on, and different scientists and stuff, including Annie Jacobson. There's a whole list of people that we had in different shows. We had a guy that did Project Green Glow in your country. But anyway, you can tune in on Friday nights, and there's a lot that we're adding to the what we've involved and what we've uncovered off the book and some other research that we have. So,
I shall have to look into that.
Listen, if you got an interest in Rendlesham, everything has been covered in there. It's really good.
Fantastic stuff.
And James Worrow, the guys that are involved right now are James Worrow, Professor Simon, he goes by, or Simon Holland, he was a British filmmaker, and then Race Hobbs and myself. And eventually, probably when we get to the history of the area, we'll probably draw Ronnie in for a show. So
awesome. Well, all I can say is, guys, thanks for a very informative, interesting evening. And hopefully we can do it again sometime, because I'm sure there's a lot more.
Oh, you'll never get
get the end of it. But yeah, I mean, John, thanks for coming on. Lovely to meet you. And hopefully, we can maybe do this again.
Well, I always say, just when I think it's safe to come out of the water, something else raises its ugly head. So we'll see. I mean, there's, like you said, there's all kinds of stuff going on in America right now having to do with UAPs and our government's interest in it and hearings and all that. So probably down the road, there'll be more to come. As the old saying, is there more to come? Yeah, there's more.
Awesome. Elaine, have you got any anything on your spirit box tonight?
I have words which never come through before.
Really?
I will obviously put them on your wall. I say it every time, I ain't done it yet. I will do it.
These just come through. These are words, random words that we get.
Oh, sorry, my fingers are just blocking everything. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was down in the forest one night with I can't remember his name now, but he run. I was a friend of Derek's. Derek knows him, but he had a spirit box, and the name come through that isn't well known with the Rendlesham Forest. So this bloke was in the spirit, and that was really spooky. The information what come out on that, because I knew of the name, but he isn't a person who's been mentioned much at all. But the name came through.
Yeah, we'll have to go down and give it a go, Elaine, sometime. But as I say, been a fantastic evening.
Good, glad you enjoyed it.
I hope all everyone's. We didn't do many questions tonight, so sorry about that, guys. Next week we have Andy Powell on, don't we, Elaine? Fantastic guy. Talks about the crop circles. Been on before, and again, another interesting subject, and that's what it's all about, isn't it? Yeah. Well, I'm going to shut this down. I won't take you out yet, and I'm just going to put up our little thing. Elaine told me about this the other day. If you can. And apparently this one is supposed to have our photographs in it, which thing is, I can't remember where I got it from. And I can't put the photos in there. I've got to go and find the original. So that's my job for the week, Elaine.
Very good.
See, I'm very busy. Anyway, guys, we're going to. I've got another comment up here. I don't know what's going on here. Anyway, guys, I'm going to shut the broadcast down now. Thanks again for tuning in, and I hope you've enjoyed it. And we'll see you next week. Same time, same place, 7 o'clock.